Were any of you at the Southern Clinical Conference? Didn't hear me do this presentation? All right, we'll try to do everything, try and touch as much as we can. Sean Leisner, I'm externship director, Center for Excellence director. I teach courses in PR and client interviewing, coach competition teams. Like many of you, just keep putting on more and more hats to kind of keep the law school running in general. I'm going to try to touch on a lot of different kind of pieces of the rural externship program that we've developed at Washburn and try to walk you through a little bit of what we've done and how we did it. Because it's been very, both purposefully and accidentally, carefully orchestrated to get us to where we are right now and to get us where we're going here down the road. Of course, I have competition down the road here, so I can't give away all our secrets. We'll touch on a few of them anyway. Is there a rural lawyer problem? Excuse me. Simple answer is yes, absolutely yes. What we see is the rural lawyers in Kansas especially are, I like to use this phrase, aging out of service. A lot of these folks are 65, 68, 70 in these rural communities, and they are literally ready to shut their doors. I told this story a couple times earlier today, different folks I was talking to. We have one of our alumni who literally said, I would like to close my office, but people would just come to my front porch. So I need someone to kind of step in and take over the practice, and I'm happy to mentor and I'm happy to kind of hand things over, but I've got to get somebody to fill that particular role. The continuing declining numbers basically impact the legal services provision, and we've had a lot of judges in these areas say it's disrupting the courts. From conflict perspectives, they're having a hard time appointing somebody on the other side of just kind of a basic case, whether that be a SIM case, looking for guardian license, whatever it might be. When there's only one or two attorneys serving a county, the vast majority of citizens either do without or pay the cost if they're able to bring in outside counsel. We have at least a couple counties in Kansas that do not have any lawyers. There may be one or two that are retired, that are technically in the books, but they do not have any practicing lawyers. That's kind of scary in the grand scheme of things, and I think that's true for some other states that are out across the U.S. of large rural areas as well. Is there evidence of a rural lawyer program? Again, simple answer is yes, absolutely yes. Is everybody here familiar with the ADA article? All right, this is out there, and this is where you'll hear this little statistic from. There are a lot of other articles out there talking about rural law issues and things different states have done. Most of them are fairly anecdotal, and they're 3 or 4 paragraphs. And they'll just kind of recite back to this statistic. Lorelei Laird, in this particular article back in 2014, really was the first article that said, yes, we have a rural lawyer problem. And the statistic that was provided is that the 20% of the population, 20% of the population lives in rural areas, but only 2% of the small firms provide services in those areas. So there's a 10 times demand just based on basic statistics. Arguably, there's more than that. There's also Kansas Board of Regents. My wife has worked down there and does some of the statistical work. But in their most recent reports, they have identified as a high demand job analysis is rural lawyers in Kansas. We're right up there with all the other professions. So when you talk about rural areas trying to get doctors and trying to get dentists and trying to get engineers, lawyers in those rural areas are in that same category. Why haven't students embraced rural opportunities? And you guys have probably seen some of these points as well. Many of them may be legitimate or not. Substantial law school debt load and anticipated lower income opportunities. And I say anticipated. Most of our students are realizing if you get into these rural areas, there is plenty of work to do. And they can be at a 6-figure salary very quickly, a year or 2 out, in a community where the nicest house in town is $100,000. Now they go up from there as well, but they can live very nicely, a lower cost of living. Here's a lack of social opportunities. The students that I placed in this program last summer had that kind of trepidation when they came in and we started talking about it. They came back, and if we have enough time, I'll show you a short video of those students. But they were astounded at how accepted they were to these communities. They had young people down the block coming over and inviting them over to play cards or to go out and see a movie or to barbecue or to whatever. These communities embraced them. I mean, they were the new excitement in town, most of them said. They were kind of overwhelmed at how nice people were. And they kind of felt like sometimes they expected something, or, you know, they were a little, just like I say, uncomfortable with it, but they got comfortable fairly quickly. Lack of entertainment and access to kind of entertainment and opportunities in general. Some of the things that they learned was in these rural areas, people aren't afraid to get in the car and drive. And what might be an hour drive in an urban community will get you to another major city in western Kansas. They can go to Hayes and do kind of whatever they want as far as shopping and movies and that sort of thing. Not being accepted in the community kind of touches back what I've touched on as well. They were embraced by these communities, bar none. There was not one experience they had where they weren't thrilled with them being out there. A little bit of not feeling confident to engage in general practice. Students came back to me, and it was refreshing with this particular group, and I do externships with all our different students, different placements. They liked not feeling competent because the attorneys that were in these areas embraced what it was they wanted to learn about. We had one female attorney that was almost on the Colorado border who literally took on 2 different cases in areas outside of her regular practice area because the student was interested in it. So I'll pick up 2 of these and I'll walk you through how to do it. And of course, local court there also was kind of in on being understanding and reasonable with timelines and that sort of thing, so she could do that. And other just general unknowns. The reason's realistic, it depends on your perspective. Substantial law school debt or lower income opportunities, you have an extremely lower cost of living in these areas. And rent out there may be $300, $400 a month for a nice house. And once you start thinking about that, it makes it a lot more palatable to pay that student loan bill if you have debt. If you have a reasonable debt load to start with. Social opportunities, a lot of this is what you like to do. We have one of our alumni that's out there that started a hockey league. So they drive into Dodge City, if you know where Dodge City's out, way out west. They have ice, they have a hockey team out there. They have a lawyer hockey league. So literally, they go out and play hockey, and they have ice during the summer out there. Not a lot of other things to do, so they make sure they can do that. Interstate travel, highway access, I touched on that a little bit as well. Interstate 70 goes right across Kansas. They can be back into Topeka in about 4 or 5 hours, even if they're all the way to the Colorado border. The acceptance in the community, et cetera, et cetera. Is the rural lawyer program, or problem, a social justice concern? I think absolutely yes. The most simple and basic step to fair and equal justice is access. Many rural lawyers are facing the tough choices of de facto rationing of justice and choosing what legal work to do and what cases they can take. In these rural communities, there are only so many hours in the day. These lawyers are telling me I have to turn away so much work. And it's not that it's not stuff I want to do, there's just only so much I can do. Many of them, and I was a little worried about our students being competition. Competition is a non-issue out there. There's so much work to do. A number of the firms have said, I can take on 2 or 3 lawyers, and we still wouldn't even touch on how much demand we have out there. And that's just from basic will drafting, divorces, civil work, contractual work, transactional work, all those sorts of things. There is an abundance of work to be done in these areas. Does a rural lawyer violate model rule 8.4G in choosing clients? I talked about this in the last session here a little bit. The new rule 8.4G is interesting for rural lawyers. Kansas has not adopted 8.4G. Last Friday, or Friday before, I spoke on a panel about whether or not Kansas should adopt 8.4G over Johnson County, the Johnson County Bar, with a couple of KU law professors and a judge and a couple of folks on both kind of political ends of the spectrum, we'll say it that way. And it was interesting. It was one of the few times I've seen a room of 50 lawyers actively engaged in a panel discussion for 2 hours. Because if you think about it, all of these issues, if you look at deeply held religious beliefs, if you look at deeply held beliefs in regards to ethnicity issues, orientation, gender issues, et cetera, all of those start getting really uncomfortable in a rural community because everybody knows everybody. The point I focused on in my presentation was this whole concept of discrimination based on socioeconomic status. And part of the point out of these communities is, how do these lawyers choose the clients they're going to take based on ability to pay? When they want to engage and do some of the Atticus Finch sort of social justice work, they've still got to be able to pay their rent. They've still got to be able to feed their family. They have to be able to have enough income on the cases that are income producing to be able to step up and take the case that nobody else wants to take. And the reality is sometimes the court will actually give them a little bit of payment or a little bit of support in doing discovery, that sort of thing. But a lot of times they've got to make those decisions. And it comes right back to that rationing of justice concept as well. So if you start getting more attorneys, you put more attorneys back in these areas, you start addressing some of these concerns that are identified in Model Rule 8.4G. But as far as reality on the ground, when you put it in a rural area, this is a tough thing to do. And the ADA folks that adopted this, I don't think thought about this. I'm not going to go too far in this, it's going to be 2 hours of discussion today, but it's something interesting to think about when you're thinking about trying to go out and put folks in rural areas. Conflicts for rural lawyers. Conflicts become a way of life. And this is one of those things when I did the initial externship session before the students went out there last summer, it scared the hell out of them. Because, well, how are conflicts rules going to work? Now, interesting points out in these areas is once you represent a family, you represent the whole family. You start having real conflict issues just based on family and relationships and those sorts of things. Now you can get into the nuances, is it the same or similar matter, et cetera, but the reality is you start making choices from those perspectives. County lines a lot of times will define the roles you take in regards to prosecution and defense work. We have folks that are a municipal judge over here in this little town, and then their defense counsel in this county, and then their part-time county attorney in this county, and they're doing those things because nobody else is out there to do them.
That finally helps me understand, because when somebody was telling me that they, they're judge, defense, prosecutor, I'm like, that really is not allowed, and it's different counties.
That's how they do it. And if you talk to the disciplinary administrator's office in Kansas, one, they don't like to talk about it.
Well, yeah.
But when you get them talking a little bit, it's our intent and our expectation in these rural areas is that they follow the intent of the law. As long as they're doing the intent,
Spirit, yeah.
The spirit sort of thing, they're okay with that.
Well, if there's no
Yeah.
lawyers, I mean, you have to do some
it
coping,
comes down-
right?
Too, we have small counties where county attorneys also have a general practice.
Mhm.
Now, I don't understand how you clear conflicts.
Yeah.
And that's pretty, I'm an Iowa kid too, so that's not uncommon up there.
No, we have municipal
Yes.
court judge that has a general practice. In the same court.
Most of them out here, they will literally do a county line sort of, and they'll still have conflicts. Things will go over the county line, and then they'll recuse themselves or step out and have somebody else represent. But that's the kind of way they try to deal with that. They refer out, take on cases to keep the system working. If you're appearing in front of the judge in your county, who sometimes is only in your county 2 days a week, 1 day a week,
Right, so-
and they need something taken on, you take it on. And that may be your pro bono for whatever period of time that you're talking about. Again, the spirit of the rules is going to guide the principle. There isn't an easy answer. There's one attorney out there that everybody told me a different perspective and story about, but every one of them had dealt with that attorney who just got disbarred. Wonderful teaching experience for our students in these areas, because they got to share a little bit when we processed at the end of the semester the different pieces they got of why that particular attorney got disbarred. Now, that was a tough conversation to have, mind you, but it was very eye-opening to them. How our states with substantial rural areas bringing together those aging out rural lawyers. There are legal or medical loan reductions different states are trying. And there's a whole bunch of different things that are just being thrown at the wall in regards to this problem. Not many of them are sticking, because they only deal with one piece of the puzzle. There are some special bar association programs. I know Nebraska's doing this right now, and they've ramped it up a little bit in Nebraska, and they're throwing money at it, and they're doing a couple different programs each year. One of my students went up to one of the recent programs they had and really liked it, but it didn't get him anything at the end. It was just more of a conversational sort of thing from his perspective. Different rural engagement programs, and I'm going to touch on that here in a little bit and come back to it. One of the things we're starting to do is early identification of rural college-bound students who want to return home. Fort Hays State University, I'm giving away one of our secrets here. General counsel out there happens to be a Washburn Law alumni. So we're looking at doing programming with them, and I've done CLE programming and everything else, to get those folks to understand we're a resource. We're a place they can come that understands where they're coming from and where they want to go back to. And creative solutions, a little bit of the creative solutions, a couple of things I'm going to touch on here really quickly. Please ask me questions if you'd like to. I'm just going to try to touch and throw a whole bunch of this at you and then kind of come back to questions. But I'll stop at any point because I'm not going to be able to get through everything in time we have. What we've done, we started with active engagement with alumni who serve the areas. Initially, very high expectations, little progress. A lot of the alumni out there, they give me 2 people, I'll give them a placement, we'll get them a job. Well, it's not that easy. They have to have a reason to want to go in those areas. Ultimately, however, we started to gain some traction, and each separate program, I'm going to talk about here in just a second, has kind of worked to create a few more rural lawyers. As we get those lawyers, they bring out more lawyers and more law students, and it's kind of started to build upon itself. Southwest Kansas Bar Association, University of Kansas School of Law, and Washburn School of Law. You can see folks are occasionally out there, but you don't have a formal presence out there. This is way west Kansas. This is equivalent of the other end of the state from here, you see. But every fall,
it's a long state.
It's a long state. Yeah. In 2010, we started taking small groups of students out with the dean, myself, our development folks, and we take about 10 or 12 students out. And KU Law would take 10 or 12 students out. Initially, just kind of simply attending, but then we started introducing students, and those introductions led to social interactions, and now there's a formal roundtable discussion before a Thursday night welcome reception that our local young attorneys with a couple seasoned attorneys that sit down and no questions are off the table, talk to students about what the rural practice is like. And they're very blunt about it, the good, the bad, the ugly. They have open conversations about that. That started getting law students to think about this as a possibility. Me telling them what it's like, even as a young lawyer that came from rural backgrounds, et cetera, that didn't sound like these sorts of things have started selling. That led a couple years later to informal interviews, and I use that term loosely, during breaks in their Friday annual bar CLE program, where they kind of did speed dating interviews with lawyers out in that area. And there was no promise of it leading to a position. It was literally them getting to know each other and ask questions. And out of that, every year, after about 2012, 2013, 1 or 2 of our students started getting jobs when they graduated. Out of this program over the last 7 years that we've done it, we just figured we have 13 lawyers that are out there. Now that's all of western, southwestern Kansas, which is large territory, but they're starting to get out there now. This also came to a gift from a generous lawyer who's in the Southwest Kansas Bar Association, providing a financial gift to each of us to, I say Kansas law schools, we're once again in the state, to help students with some of the costs of returning to interview in the area. This was a nice check, but not a terribly large check, but it would pay for mileage or a rental car or a hotel room for students to go out and interview with a firm. Now keep in mind this is a 5-hour drive, a 6-hour drive. A lot of them don't have reliable transportation. We have an agreement with Enterprise. They went from Enterprise, we get direct billed, we pay for that. They go out, they get a hotel room, we reimburse the cost of the hotel room, and we pay for gas. So what's $150, $200 maybe out of the grant to a student, that's a lot of money. and it gets them to go out there and take that chance. And we have more money than we can spend right now. So we're using some of this to support students who are going to do a couple summer externships in the area too. Again, 16, I guess, since 2010, that we've had positions out there. This last fall, I went out, 2 different students who are now practicing, came up to me and thanked me for taking them out to the event a few years ago. They said that's what made them take the position out there where they're practicing now. Then I had my students immediately when I got the thank, let me introduce you to student A and student B, and they got more of that networking as well. We started a Rural Legal Practice Initiative, which is a joint program with Kansas State University. We're going over doing speaking engagements with the pre-law students. I always get to be the boring guy to talk about ethics, but we talk about oil and gas law, low water law. These are things that students in rural areas have to be at least exposed to. They are not going to have expertise, but once they start getting exposed and understand some of these things, they can speak the language of the lawyers that are out there. In that initiative, the first 4 accepted participants, a couple were rising seniors, a couple of juniors. At that time, this was last fall, we had added 3 more students. I have 2 more I need to look at and probably approve when I get back to my office. One of the seniors, 4.0 GPA from, I'm going to say small town Kansas. I'm keeping this generic and not violating FERPA. But with that student's permission, this is what she stated in her application for the program. I'll give you just a second to read that.
She's gonna be great, or so we hope.
This, and I've used this a few times with just general presentations to students at the law school. Students that come from small towns, even if they say, I don't know that I want to go back, things like this start connecting them back. Especially in that second year, that third year, they start thinking about, wait a second, maybe I do want to think about going back home. We did a Washburn Out West CLE program. Again, the other faculty members and myself that are engaged, we went out and did a 4-hour CLE program for about 30 attorneys in the area because they wanted us to physically be out there. They don't want something online. They don't want something where we invite them to come in. They want us out there. So we went out, drove 5 hours, did a 4-hour CLE, drove back. The engagement value of that was just exponential. This time I talked about serving on nonprofit boards. At that one, we had about 24 attended, I believe. One of the young ladies was graduating from Dodge City High School, had been working as a clerk at a local law firm. The attorney she worked for asked if she could attend for free. I said, absolutely. Signed up, sat in the sessions. During breaks, she talked to all of us about what courses to take in college, LSAT prep and everything else. Learned about the Rural Practice Initiative. 2 weeks ago, this was in the fall. I attended the prospective student event in Topeka. Again, this was last fall. This fall, she will be at K-State. She is already getting ready to enroll in the program to come over to Washburn when she's at K-State. So we're getting her 5 years before, 4 years before, already lined up for Washburn. Don't steal my hand.
Now, we would have to do it in Missouri, because it's kind of interesting, I'm pretty new to the area, and the Missouri-Kansas divide, like, there's like, yeah, I like Missouri.
What's the true divide?
I had a trial in Wichita, people were afraid to say they were from Missouri.
Yeah, it was, you know, I mean, obviously, you know, they cross state line, which, by the way, is just a street.
Yeah, most people don't realize that.
It's like, really? You could tell. Tax abatements, you know, like who gave the last one? Because there's like a dead, you know, shopping center here and a lively one here. I'm like, okay. Anyhow, sorry, I digress.
The next thing we did is the Dane Hansen Foundation happens to be a very nice group of folks and a family that did a lot of the economic development in Northwest Kansas. And they started a family foundation. Now, there's all kinds of conversation about what they did to become a foundation and how they monopolized all the business out there, et cetera, et cetera. But at the end of the day, those of us that were supportive of the rural program forced ourselves to take time out of our schedules to put a grant together. We got about a fourth of our grant award to get started. What those grants are doing is they're paying for 6 hours of credit, and they're giving the student a $5,000 stipend over the summer for living expenses. But that's from a foundation that's in that area that has a vested interest in bringing new young professionals out there. Now, they were a little leery of this. They like medical doctors, they like engineers, they like dentists, but out of the gate, they were a little, well, yeah, we need lawyers, but how's this going to work? So we had to talk a little bit, answer some questions, but we encouraged them and they did this. At this point in time, we are their favorite people in the world. And we're taking out, probably I have 18 students that will probably go this summer in that area. The point of it, and how we talked about this and how we wrote the grant and everything else, is that these students don't just do a simple legal externship. They get exposed to all of the rest of rural lawyers' work. They get immersed in these communities. They're going to board meetings, they're going to the city court, they're going to the school board that the attorney's advising, they're going to a nonprofit meeting. They are becoming that rural lawyer, that Atticus Finch, that we all kind of know and love from Eagle Money. And they're seeing how those attorneys in those communities serve those roles. Go ahead.
So I want to ask about that because that, we have an alum who has a practice in Minnesota, but she has also opened a practice in Montana because her family is in Montana. And she kind of goes back and forth between the two states, living primarily in Minnesota, and then going to Montana over the holidays, basically. And so she holds office hours in Montana over the holidays, but she does the rest of her work remotely for those clients. And it's something that we've been thinking about with our students, whether it's developing an online clinic or something to sort of help them kind of think about that as a model. But that issue that you just mentioned is something that I've kind of run into in the past. And I was, before I was teaching, had applied for a position in Northfield, Minnesota, which is literally 20 minutes south of my house in Lakeville.
Okay.
And they offered me the position, but they said you're required to move to Northfield. I said, well, it's 20 minutes away. And he said, but it doesn't matter because you have to be in the grocery store, you have to be on the rotary, you have, and the fact that you are in Lakeville makes a huge difference for our client base. And so, and that was some years ago, but I guess I'm curious if you think that has changed or is starting to change, because,
that has changed. I'll give you a hard example we had from, this is probably about 3 months ago, 2 or 3 months ago. One of the alumni who had gone out to the bar meeting and heard all the wonderful experiences some of these attorneys had had, called and talked to myself and our professional development office director, and they are in Marion County. And that's outside. Our area is Salina up and Salina West. That's this area experience. And they said they wanted to take on a paid student extern that was interested in rural practice and understood they were outside of this area. But they're setting it up to actually let them have a satellite office, and once they come in and get trained in that main office, they will have all the electronic support, everything remote, and then they can pick around that county any of these counties they want to have a satellite office in. And then they can become a part of that community. Now, they want them out in that community still, like you. But they're starting to understand they can kind of do this consortium sort of law offices. One of my students that I had placed this summer was up here in Norton County. And I had one student placed with 2 attorneys that actually had a partnership. One office was in Norton, one office was in Phillips, and the student worked for both. But they did, each of them did a different type of work, so they would take the cases from each other back and forth and travel when they needed to travel and that sort of thing. Sorry, very generic answer to your question, but that's a little bit of kind of what they're doing out there.
Yeah.
The reality is a lot of these people travel. They have nice, fuel-efficient cars, and they drive a lot. When I did site visits on 2 different trips. Each one was 2 days long. I drove, I stopped, I had an hour-long site visit, I drove an hour, I stopped, I had an hour-long site visit, I drove an hour, I stopped, et cetera, et cetera. I came to realize that these 2 counties are in a whole different time zone, and I am over there in Topeka. Thankfully, the student told me that ahead of time, so we could adjust the schedule appropriately. But these are Washburn Law alumni that we have across Kansas.
I like that one.
We've used this for years in fundraising. And now we have them for all the surrounding states. But it gives you an idea here. In a lot of these counties, we're about 2/3 of the county attorneys in Kansas are Washburn Law grads, which gives you kind of a flavor. About 2/3 of the attorneys in rural Kansas, especially are Washburn Law grads. Greeley County, 0. Pasco County, 0. Doe, 1. Rollins, 1. Cheyenne, my law school friend and best man, who's now the judge of these 4 counties, was one of those 2, and now he's the judge. That gives you an idea of what's out there.
So, can I ask,
These were my students who were last summer. And Topeka, we're all the way over there. Sorry, go ahead.
what's the advantage of doing this as an externship as opposed to just a summer internship?
I mean, like a summer job.
Mm-hmm.
We define internship as paid, externship as unpaid. It's been my opinion, and I think we've seen some truth to this. If you have these as unpaid summer opportunities, the lawyers out there are spending more time mentoring. They see it as more of an opportunity to actually train. They see it as less of a drain on their income. It's just a matter of kind of perception. A number of them have said before that they would take an attorney or take a law student in a paid position, but they want to interview and they want to go through a process. And there's no logical, easy way to get a student out there for an interview for a summer externship that's going to pay minimum wage. Now, we've done a couple of them. I've got a couple that are going to be down here in southern Kansas this summer, but on a large scale, it's just very hard to do. Part of the community, this is one of my lawyers, that's one of my students, picture from the back, so we're okay doing that. I got the email from the lawyer who was placed with, said, thought I'd let you know the student's already gone native. He and his partner won the July 4th horseshoe contest. He was also kind enough to ensure that I did not finish last in the 8K race we had in the morning.
Aww, what a good egg.
This was an urban kid who was interested in going out to work in a rural area. He's kind of middle of the class, some engagement, but he's kind of realized from this experience that's a place I can have a career. I'm about 5 minutes away from my time. There's a video, if you look at the Hansen Foundation Washburn grant on YouTube. I won't show it because we don't have time to show it right now. But all of my students, about half of my students, from this summer program do kind of a thank you and explain what their experience was. And I always feel a little uncomfortable saying this, but I want to say it for the point. One of my female students in the video says, to an extent, I want to go out and practice in rural Kansas because I can have a professional career and I can also have a family. And I can go to softball practice and I can do things with the kids and I can be a part of the community. And rural practice will give you the opportunity to do that. Now, I don't think that's only a gender thing by any means, but that's one of our high-performing students who literally said, that's what I value, and found out through this program, this is a place I can do that. And that's one of the things that's very strong about the video. Recruiting for this year, I showed the video right up front.
Right.
I just introduced myself, literally I didn't introduce any concepts or requirements or anything else. I said, I'm going to show you the video and then we're going to talk. And students were nodding their head after the 6-minute video. So they started to understand, oh, that is what this is all about. Good.
Is that a grant that you're getting renewed year after year, or is your law school eventually going to pick up those costs?
This was a grant that they technically agreed to for 1 year with the second year renewal to give us a window to kind of prove ourselves. The last comment from the family was we want to do it. And if we need more, let them know. Now you have to understand throughout all those 26 counties, these are counties that had somebody out there for the summer. They saw the light at the end of the tunnel. Even if they don't get a student out of this batch, the next batch, or the next batch, maybe somebody that comes out of that area. Out of that, my Southwest Kansas bar guy started looking, and they talked amongst themselves, and they found a small foundation in Southwest Kansas that is now going to give us enough for 2 students in Southwest, because they heard about this program and they want students in Southwest Kansas. So now we're charged with the Southeast Kansas folks finding us a foundation. But it's all building, everything builds, and these are all those relationships. You have to have that level of trust with these folks to get them to understand you're not in it for anything for yourself, you're in it to do the right thing. And once they understand, a lot of it's handshake. And with a couple of our faculty, I had to explain to them, I need to physically drive out and sit down and have a beer with these people and shake hands. This is not a teleconference, this is not a phone call, this is a go out and shake hands. And when I go out, this is how I go out. I do not put a suit and tie on. I would get chased out of there quickly. Sorry, I had no question.
Oh, well, so I'm presuming the students that are going out there, it's not because they have family there, and so they don't have a natural connection to the place. So how are they choosing Southwest or Northwest? How do they choose, they're all small towns, so what are the students reacting to? What draws them one place or another?
The students are getting matched up based largely on interest. I have a 2-page form that walks through kind of what they're trying to get out of it, where they come from, what their background is, what their undergraduate degree is, what areas lost of interest to them, how they did in certain classes, and I try to kind of do a reasonable
So you're
thing.
the matcher, yeah.
Yes, as best I can, with the understanding it ain't perfect, but at least it kind of works out. Part of the conversation I had in the orientation session, and I really emphasized this year, was if you get the experience in a small community, even if you don't go there, you now have demonstrated your legitimate interest in rural practice to interview anywhere else you want to go. Now this program has also probably, last I heard, got us a student from K-State who wants to go out in another state, a rural area, saw this program, talked to these students, is coming to our law school and has an astronomical GPA and LSAT. But has no interest in going to a big firm, no interest in going to a big city, and wants to go back out. And the little thing I did with her is I hooked her up with one of our alumni whose family has a cow farm out by Manhattan, and she got to go out and ride horses and run cattle. And talk to him about what his experience was at Washington Law, so that was what kind of sealed the deal on that student. All of that said, I serve a lot of roles at Washburn, and I think all of you probably do as well. We do CLE programming, we're doing extra, all these things, we really are starting to understand they all work together. You have to kind of continually developing those relationships to have people trust us to put somebody with them and take somebody on. Other questions? It's not maybe a minute.
That's pretty cool.
Shoot me emails if you have questions. I'm happy to talk to those.
Are most of your students from Kansas originally?
Not really. We're probably about 60% Kansas, 40% non-Kansas. I jokingly say we were the least expensive Texas law school for quite a while. Until one of the schools down there figured it out and cut their rates a little bit. But we have a lot of students from Utah. Actually Canada, yeah. Surprisingly, 3 or 4 students from Canada. Happy to answer any questions. Thank you very much.
Thank you.